Hello, this is James Hudnall and episode 38 of Creative Secrets. This one is about creating dialogue and understanding what dialogue is. So I want to get into that now because this is a topic that is very important. As important as story structure and characterization is, dialogue is the third pillar of storytelling. And the better you make it, the better it's going to be because people love good dialogue. They can overlook sometimes a bad plot if the dialogue is entertaining, but they will not if the dialogue sucks, believe me. So here's some things to consider. First, dialogue is not real conversation. It's only supposed to sound real. After all, a story is a simulation of reality, not reality itself. In real life, people are not, shall we say, interesting a lot of the time. A lot of times they say and ah a lot. You can't have that in dialogue. So dialogue is the best version of situations. Number two, it must sound realistic. So the best way to do that is to say it out loud so it sounds real, or tell it to other person, or have somebody read it back to you and see if it sounds realistic. Number three, keep it short and sweet. No one likes long-winded conversations except the person saying them. Your goal in the dialogue is to present information. It is not to bore people, so you want to avoid that at all costs. Number four, keep it. If you've heard it before, think of another way of saying it. Cliché dialogue is something to avoid at all costs. A lot of times we hear dialogue that's been taken from some movie, and other people have used that in other movies, and it becomes tiresome to just hear the same cliches over and over again, and it's not clever at all. It just kind of cheapens your work if you do that. I would say number five is one of my favorites. All cliches must die. Really, cliché dialogue is something that has to end. If it can possibly happen, we got to avoid it at all costs. Number six, research. Cultures and subcultures have their own idioms and patois, which is a manner of speaking, a dialectish kind of way. So Spanglish, for example, is Spanish laced with English, laced with Spanish words. And in other cultures, they often intersperse English with their sentences, like India especially uses a lot of English words that they sprinkle into their conversations. But it's something to consider. And dialogue should not be expected unless you want it to be. In other words, surprise the audience, don't bore them. So do not give dialogue that the audience is expecting. It's sometimes better to do something other than what they're expecting. And I would also say that David Mamet, the great playwright, said something very effective about dialogue that you should remember, and that rule is everybody wants something, so their dialogue should be a reflection of that. The fact is that every living thing on this planet wants something, whether it be air, sex, food, whatever. Human beings have more complicated desires, but the point is that most people speak, whether they realize it or not, with regards to getting something that they want. They either are telling you something because they want something, or they're telling you something because they're trying to influence you, whether they realize it or not. So you have to consider the motivations of your characters. Your characters are presenting information, but they also may have a motivation behind that. In literature, dialogue comes in two distinct types, inner and outer dialogue. Inner dialogue is best confined to prose stories and comics, but is extremely hard to do in film or plays. Basically, it's the thoughts of the character, the thoughts and feelings of the character. In inner dialogue, the characters speak to themselves and reveal their personalities. They also reveal their inner thoughts, their inner insecurities, things that they wouldn't reveal to the persons outside of them. In comics, this would be shown in thought bubbles or captions. To use inner dialogues, writers often employ techniques like stream of consciousness or dramatic monologue. You can find such dialogues in the works of Stephen King, Frank Miller, William Faulkner, for example. Outer dialogue, these are simple conversations between two characters used in almost all types of fictional works. It's most common form that you see. Whenever two people are talking in a story, it's outer dialogue. Dialogue is not real conversation, as I said before. Real dialogue is boring and oppressive and translates when it's translated to print. People always say, I mean, so forth. And lots of other redundant words and sounds which are not relevant to the story and they just get in the way. In the case of comics, you have a very limited amount of space in each word balloon to say something, so you have to keep your dialogue down to like 25 words or less per balloon. And so you have to cut out that stuff and only use it sparingly. Dialogue needs to be memorable. It can't even be remotely dull, because any forgettable dialogue sucks energy from your story. Good dialogue adds to the pleasure of reading, and thus the energy of the story. If you've ever read a story where you just love the sound of it as you're reading it, that's because the writer did a good job. They have good prose, they have good dialogue, and it keeps you entertained and it keeps you wanting to read the next line. That's the goal. That's what you're trying to do, whether you realize it or not. That's something you need to think about. More importantly, whatever people say to each other in a story has to move the story along. So, as I said before, a character's motivations often color their dialogue. A character can lie, the character can misinform intentionally or unintentionally, but whatever that character is doing, they're moving the dialogue in a certain direction, and they're doing it for a reason as part of their motivation. When you have conversations with people in real life, it's good to kind of really listen to them for the first time, more than you've ever done before, because it'll tell you a lot about the way people think and the way that they communicate with each other. The show don't tell rule applies in dialogue as much as anything else we've talked about. If you can show us something visually instead of telling us, it would work a lot better for you. Dialogue should be first dramatic and informational. That's your priority. You can explain things visually, but if you are using a visual medium such as comics or film, then you have to consider that you can employ the techniques and power of those mediums more effectively without the dialogue, and use the dialogue to color what you're seeing to give sort of like icing on the cake. Have you ever seen a conversation between two people where you were just dying to hear every single thing they said because each line made you want to hear the next response? You need to be able to do that in your story if you can. You need to make these lines of dialogue count. Dialogue is an art form. It really is, and some people have gotten famous with their dialogue, such as Quentin Tarantino. His whole career, not his whole career perhaps, but a large part of it came from his dialogue. It's helpful to follow the rules that I've outlined below, or above, or, so far. Anyways, prolixity is something you want to avoid. This is a form of writing that has a lot more words than you need and a lot of complicated words. It can make this character, the dialogue, seem boring or passive. That's the other thing, is passive voice is something you want to avoid. I'll get into that in another video. There's a lot more to dialogue, and I'll be getting into that in separate videos. This is just to give you the basics, and then I'll go into more elaboration. On all the other subjects that I've discussed already, I'll probably do more videos to explain them in detail, because there is more than just the stuff that I'm covering. It's a lot of what I've covered so far is just the groundwork, but then to get into the more technical nuances, that'll take other videos. So that's it for this week, or this episode, sorry. I'll be back in a day or two. Please subscribe if you haven't done so. Please tell your friends. Please like this video, and I will talk to you later. Thank you very much. Bye.